Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com. Each week, we take one pivotal moment from United States military history and follow it from the first warning signs to the final outcome. Today, we go to the desert north of Kuwait City in the Gulf War for the story of the Highway of Death. A longer print edition with fact sheets and photos is available on LinkedIn or by email. The night sky over the desert north of Kuwait City does not go dark. It flickers orange and white against a low cloud of smoke over Highway 80. Below that glow, a long Iraqi column is jammed nose to tail along the pavement and onto the shoulders. Tanks, trucks, buses, command cars and trailers loaded with looted cargo and personal kit sit in a broken line. Some engines still idle. Some vehicles are abandoned with doors open. Many are already burning, their fuel tanks feeding tall flames that turn steel hulls into black silhouettes. Coalition aircraft work the road in steady passes, navigation lights blacked out as pilots call targets and coordinate their attacks. Bombs and rockets strike clusters of vehicles, and secondary explosions ripple down the line as ammunition cooks off in sudden white flashes. On the ground, Iraqi soldiers dive into ditches, crouch behind vehicles, or run into the open desert to escape the burning highway. Some carry rifles, some carry nothing at all. What had seemed like a route back toward Basra has become a killing ground. This road mattered because it sat at the end of a campaign that began months earlier. In August 1990, Iraqi forces invaded and occupied Kuwait, quickly overwhelming Kuwaiti units and taking control of the capital, oil facilities, and key government sites. Saddam Hussein expected a quick gain in territory and oil leverage. Instead, the invasion triggered a global backlash. The United Nations condemned Iraq, imposed sanctions, and the United States organized a broad coalition that included Arab partners, European allies, and other contributors. Operation Desert Shield brought coalition forces into Saudi Arabia to block further Iraqi movement and prepare for a possible offensive. Ports, airfields, logistics hubs, tank parks, and artillery positions spread across the desert. Inside Kuwait, Iraqi units dug bunkers, laid minefields, built trench lines, and placed vehicles in revetments. Iraqi planners believed those defenses, along with memories of the bloody Iran-Iraq War and the possible threat of chemical weapons, might deter a ground attack or make one costly. For months, the desert became a theater of preparation. Coalition crews rehearsed breaching lanes through mines, moving armored formations over open ground, and sustaining long-distance operations through fuel, ammunition, maintenance, and communications. Air planners studied Iraqi command networks and air defenses in detail, looking for ways to blind and isolate the occupation force before ground troops crossed the line of departure. On the Iraqi side, many units waited under constant pressure, dug in but increasingly exposed to an opponent that was building a campaign around speed and integration. They misjudged the coalition's air power, speed, and coordination. Operation Desert Storm opened in January 1991 with a sustained air campaign against Iraqi command sites, air defenses, bridges, depots, and frontline formations. By late February, many Iraqi units in Kuwait were already battered, short on reliable communications, and uncertain about higher orders. When the ground offensive began, coalition armored forces did not simply push up the obvious roads. They swept wide across the western desert, turning Iraqi flanks and threatening to trap large formations. As defensive lines cracked, Iraqi forces began pulling out of Kuwait. Some units withdrew under orders, others broke contact and tried to save whatever people and equipment they could. Without firm traffic control, different formations converged on the same hard surface route north. Highway 80, the multi-lane road across flat desert toward Basra, became the spine of the retreat. Republican Guard vehicles, regular army transports, security units, support trucks, and looters mixed together in an undisciplined stream. For coalition commanders, that traffic jam was not just a defeated army heading home. It was a mass of armor, artillery, logistics vehicles, and soldiers that could still be used to defend southern Iraq or fight another day if allowed to regroup. Destroying the column would reduce future resistance and protect coalition troops pushing forward. Yet striking retreating forces at that scale also raised questions that would last long after the war. Were these still organized enemy units, or a broken force trying to escape? How much destruction was necessary? That tension is part of why the Highway of Death remains such a hard and important episode. Once the Iraqi columns began streaming north, coalition surveillance quickly fixed on the highway. Airborne radar, reconnaissance aircraft, and ground reports identified long lines of headlights and dust plumes. Strike orders directed aircraft from carriers, Saudi airfields, and other bases towards segments of the route. Airspace was divided and deconflicted so flights could work the road in sequence. Some aircraft hit choke points, including bridges, intersections, and key vehicles at the front and rear of the convoy. Those first strikes were crucial. Once the head and tail of the column were blocked, Highway 80 stopped functioning like a moving road and became a static target. Vehicles backed up behind wrecks. Drivers tried to swing into the sand and got stuck. Panic and darkness pushed trucks and armored vehicles closer together. A column that might have been harder to strike while moving became a chain of immobilized clusters marked by fires, hot engines, and exploding ammunition. This was the point at which retreat stopped being a movement problem and became a survival problem. Drivers who might have kept going had no clear lane. Soldiers who might have formed small defensive groups could not easily tell where command authority still existed. Smoke hid parts of the road and revealed others in flashes. Every explosion made the next decision harder, and every stalled vehicle made the next group more vulnerable. As the night deepened, attack runs continued. Larger aircraft struck parked tanks, armored personnel carriers, ammunition trucks, and supply vehicles. Lower and slower attack aircraft and gunships worked smaller groups on the shoulders and in the sand beside the road. Iraqi soldiers abandoned vehicles or tried to dig in near the highway, but shock, noise, confusion, and a lack of clear orders made organized defense nearly impossible. Anti-aircraft fire climbed into the sky in tracer lines, but many Iraqi air defense systems had already been suppressed or destroyed earlier in the campaign. That imbalance was one of the turning points. Coalition crews had spent weeks learning Iraqi air defense patterns, safe attack profiles, and the best ways to work under night conditions. By late February, they could make repeated passes with much less risk than they had faced at the beginning of the war. Radar, airborne warning aircraft, night-capable sensors, and precision weapons made headlights and hot engines stand out against the cold desert. Iraqi commanders had counted on darkness and urgency to protect the withdrawal, but the coalition could still see and strike. In practical terms, the road offered almost no sanctuary once the first hits stopped movement. Darkness hid details from men on the ground, but to the aircraft overhead, it often highlighted the convoy's heat, lights, and fires even more clearly. The ground campaign also helped seal the convoy's fate. Coalition armored thrusts and blocking positions narrowed Iraqi options and made delay dangerous. The threat of encirclement pushed more units towards the same roads, even as smoke from earlier strikes was already visible. Similar scenes unfolded on nearby routes, including parallel desert tracks and another highway farther west. But Highway 80 became the best-known symbol because of the density of the wreckage and the images that followed. It also became a shorthand for the whole ending of the ground war, even though the fighting across the theater was broader and more complex than one road. That shorthand is powerful, but it can flatten the story if we forget the operational pressure that drove those vehicles there in the first place. From the cockpit and command post, the road was still a battlefield. Enemy units that had invaded Kuwait were moving with weapons, equipment, and vehicles through an active combat zone. From the ground, many Iraqi soldiers experienced it differently, not as a fighting withdrawal, but as being trapped while explosions marched down the line. Both perspectives mattered. The military logic of preventing regrouping existed alongside the human reality of men caught in a technologically overwhelming attack. By dawn, the road had changed from a retreat route into a field of wreckage. Rows of charred trucks, tanks, armored personnel carriers, buses, and cargo vehicles lay burned along the pavement and in the sand. Some had been split by internal explosions. Turrets were thrown aside, cargo was scattered across the shoulders, and looted goods from Kuwait lay mixed with weapons and equipment. Survivors emerged stunned and exhausted, some surrendering to advancing coalition forces, and others walking north. The physical scene also carried a message that no staff chart could fully capture. It showed the end state of an army that had lost air cover, lost initiative, and lost the ability to move in organized formations. Vehicles built for maneuver had become fixed targets. The same road that had concentrated Iraqi strength for withdrawal had also concentrated vulnerability for coalition aircraft. That is why the name Highway of Death became attached not just to a place, but to a warning about exposure under modern air power. In campaign terms, the destruction showed how little room Iraq had left to maneuver. The coalition had not only driven Iraqi forces out of Kuwait, but had smashed a significant portion of the force that might have contested a deeper push. Within days, a ceasefire halted major combat operations. Saddam Hussein's regime remained in power, but his army was battered, and the war had demonstrated the power of an integrated air and ground campaign against a mechanized force caught in the open. The images from the Highway of Death quickly shaped public perception. Long rows of burned vehicles, some civilian-style buses and trucks mixed among obvious military targets, forced viewers to confront the scale of destruction. The war had been presented to many audiences through briefings, cockpit video, and confident descriptions of precision. The highway images were different. They showed burned metal, abandoned belongings, and a battlefield after the advantage had become overwhelming. Critics saw a one-sided pounding of troops trying to escape and questioned whether continued strikes were proportional. Supporters argued that these were armed enemy formations still under orders, and that allowing them to escape intact could have meant more fighting and more coalition casualties later. Those arguments did not change what happened on the road, but they ensured that the Highway of Death would be remembered as more than a tactical episode. It became a moral and strategic case study about air power, restraint, and the final hours of a campaign. It also showed the gap between how war looks from above and how it feels to those receiving the blows on the ground. Today, staff rides, professional military education courses, and museum discussions still return to this stretch of desert. They use it to examine air superiority, ground maneuver, targeting decisions, retreating forces, and the responsibilities that come with overwhelming advantage. For readers and listeners after the Gulf War generation, the Highway of Death remains a window into the moment when satellite-era targeting, coalition politics, and an aging mechanized army collided on a single road. The lesson is not simple triumph or simple condemnation. It is that the last night of a campaign can be as decisive and as contested in memory as its opening strike. Highway 80 reminds us that modern war can turn movement into immobility in minutes, that tactical success can carry political and moral echoes, and that victory on the ground does not end the questions historians and soldiers must keep asking. You have been listening to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine. developed by trackpads.com. Headline Wednesday is developed by trackpads.com as part of Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine.